I never thought a simple favor could turn my world upside down. When I walked into the laundry room, I found my stepson, Tyler, holding one of my lace bras, his eyes lingering far too long. "What's this?" he asked, a smirk tugging at his lips. My heart raced. "It's none of your business," I snapped, but the heat in his gaze told me this wasn't over. Tyler wasn't always like this. I'd known him since he was a shy, awkward teenager who barely spoke at family dinners. But now, at 24, he was confident, charming, and had a presence that was hard to ignore. He had recently moved back in after finishing college and starting an internship at the same marketing firm where I worked. My husband, David, Tyler's father, suggested he stay with us to save money while he settled into his career. It seemed harmless enough at the time. David and I had been married for 6 years. He was steady, dependable, and practical to a fault. But over time, our relationship had shifted. Conversations turned into routine updates, intimacy faded, and I often felt more like his roommate than his wife. I told myself that passion was something that faded naturally in long-term marriages. At 42, I had learned to accept stability over excitement. But then Tyler came home, and suddenly, everything felt different. It started with small moments, him complimenting my cooking, offering to help around the house, and even asking questions about my work. At first, it felt nice, like someone finally saw the effort I was putting in. But then the looks lingered too long, the compliments felt too personal, and the space between us felt charged. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was all in my head. After all, Tyler had always been kind and considerate. But I couldn't deny the way my heart raced when he was near or the heat that rose to my cheeks whenever he smiled at me. That day in the laundry room changed everything. It wasn't just the teasing tone in his voice or the way his eyes lingered on me. It was the way I reacted. I didn't feel disgusted or offended. I felt alive, and that scared me more than anything else. I spent the next few days avoiding him, burying myself in work, and pretending nothing had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get that moment out of my head, or the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he felt it too. The awkwardness from that day in the laundry room lingered, but Tyler didn't seem bothered by it. If anything, his behavior grew bolder. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, he leaned against the kitchen counter, watching me. "You work too hard," he said, his eyes trailing over me in a way that made my stomach flip. "It comes with the territory," I replied, trying to sound casual. "You make it look easy." His voice was soft, almost admiring, and I felt my cheeks flush. I focused on chopping vegetables, pretending not to notice the way he moved closer, his presence unsettling yet magnetic. Over the next few days, little things began to stand out. Tyler found excuses to be near me, helping with chores, joining me for late-night TV, and even asking about my job. His compliments grew more personal. "You're incredible, you know that?" he said one night as we cleaned up after dinner. I forced a smile. "You're sweet, Tyler." But it didn't feel innocent anymore. His words lingered, heavy with meaning, and I found myself second-guessing every interaction. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. After all, I was his stepmother. This couldn't possibly be more than harmless admiration. And yet, the tension between us continued to grow. One night, David left for a business trip, leaving Tyler and me alone in the house. I stayed late in my home office, hoping to avoid him. But around 10 p.m., he knocked on the door, holding 2 glasses of wine. "You look like you could use this," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I hesitated before taking the glass, my fingers brushing against his as I did. The touch lingered longer than it should have. "You don't have to keep pushing yourself so hard," he said, sitting on the edge of my desk. "It's part of the job," I replied, sipping the wine to distract myself. "You're more than your job," he said softly. His words made my heart pound. I set the glass down, suddenly aware of how close he was. "Tyler." He stood, stepping closer until I could feel the heat radiating off him. "You deserve to feel appreciated," he whispered. I pulled back, breaking the moment before it could go any further. "Thank you for the wine," I said, forcing a smile. "But I really need to finish this." He nodded, but the look in his eyes stayed with me long after he left the room. For the next few days, I avoided him again, but it didn't help. My thoughts kept drifting back to the way he looked at me, the way his words made me feel. It was wrong, but I couldn't deny the spark between us. Then one night it happened again. I walked into the living room to find him sitting on the couch, his laptop open, but his eyes fixed on me. "Long day?" he asked. I nodded, sitting down in the chair across from him. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said, closing his laptop. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You deserve to be seen," he said. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. The tension between us became impossible to ignore. Every glance, every casual touch, every stolen moment felt charged, like a spark threatening to ignite something neither of us could control. One night, after David called to say his trip would be extended, Tyler and I were left alone in the house again. I tried to keep my distance, retreating to the kitchen after dinner, but he followed me. "Can I help?" he asked, his voice low as he leaned against the counter. "I've got it," I replied, my hands trembling as I rinsed a plate. He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine as he reached for the dish towel. "You're shaking," he said softly, his fingers lingering against mine. "It's just been a long day," I said, pulling my hand away. But he didn't back off. "Look at me," he whispered. I froze, my heart pounding as I slowly turned to face him. His eyes held mine, filled with something I couldn't name, something dangerous. "You feel it too, don't you?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I should have denied it. I should have pushed him away. But instead, I stood there frozen as he stepped closer. "Tyler, we can't." "Why not?" he interrupted, his fingers brushing against my arm. "Because it's wrong," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Then why does it feel so right?" Before I could answer, he leaned in, his lips barely grazing mine. It was so quick, so tentative, that I could have dismissed it as an accident. But when I didn't pull away, he kissed me again, this time deeper, hungrier. I melted into him, my hands gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. Every rational thought screamed at me to stop, but my body betrayed me. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my heart racing. "This can't happen," I said, stepping back. "It already has," he replied. I avoided him for days after that. I buried myself in work, hoping time would kill whatever fire had ignited between us. But it didn't. One night, I walked into the living room to find him sitting on the couch, his eyes dark and unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, my voice trembling. "Stop pretending you don't feel it too." He stood, closing the space between us in seconds. "Tyler, you're all I think about," he whispered, his hand brushing against my cheek. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the emotions swirling inside me, but it was no use. I wanted him. I wanted to feel alive again. And so I gave in. The first time we crossed that line, it was reckless and desperate, a collision of need and guilt. It happened in the office late one night, after everyone had gone home. I was reviewing notes for a project when he knocked on the door. "You're still here?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I couldn't leave without seeing you." The words sent shivers down my spine. Before I knew it, he was standing in front of me, his hands cupping my face as he kissed me. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away. But instead, I let it happen. After that, there was no turning back. We found ways to be alone. Late nights in the living room, early mornings in the kitchen before David woke up, even stolen moments in the guest room when the house was quiet. It was dangerous and exhilarating. Tyler made me feel wanted, desired, things I hadn't felt in years. But with every stolen moment came the guilt. Every time I looked at David, I felt the weight of what I was doing crushing me. And yet, I couldn't stop. The nights grew longer, the touches bolder, and the lies heavier. I told myself it would end eventually, that it was just a phase. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was a fire I didn't want to put out. Then, one night, David called to say he'd be home early. Panic set in as Tyler and I scrambled to separate ourselves, but the damage had already been done. I caught Tyler's eyes as he left the room, and I knew. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. The house was too quiet that night, yet my heart pounded so loudly it filled the silence. David wasn't supposed to be home yet, but his early return threw everything into chaos. Tyler and I had been in the living room. He sat beside me, close enough that our knees touched. I told myself it was innocent, just a conversation, but the way his eyes lingered on me and the way my pulse quickened said otherwise. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said softly, his hand brushing against mine. "Tyler, stop," I whispered, but I didn't pull away. That's when we heard the front door. "Margaret?" David's voice echoed through the house. Panic flashed in Tyler's eyes, and I jumped to my feet, smoothing my clothes as though that could erase what had just happened. "Go upstairs," I hissed. But it was too late. David stepped into the room, his eyes immediately narrowing as he took in the scene. Tyler standing too close, my face flushed, my hands trembling. "What's going on?" David asked, his voice sharp. "Nothing," I said quickly, stepping forward to block his view of Tyler. David's gaze shifted between us, suspicion darkening his features. Nothing, he repeated, his voice rising. Then why do you both look like you've been caught doing something you shouldn't? Before I could answer, Tyler spoke. Dad, it's not what you think. David's eyes locked onto his son, and in that moment, something shifted, anger replacing confusion. Not what I think. David's voice cracked. You've been sneaking around with my wife? The room seemed to shrink as his words hung in the air. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the guilt was written all over my face. David. Don't, he snapped, his voice trembling. Don't you dare try to explain this. His anger turned to Tyler, who stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. You're my son, David shouted. How could you do this to me? To us? I love her, Tyler said suddenly, his voice steady but filled with desperation. The words cut through me like a knife. David's face fell, disbelief giving way to something even worse, betrayal. You love her? David's voice broke. Yes. I stepped between them, my hands shaking. David, I never meant for this to happen. But it did, he interrupted, his eyes wet with anger and hurt. You betrayed me, both of you. Get out. Both of you. No, I said quickly, tears streaming down my face. Please, David. I said get out. His voice thundered through the house, and I knew there was no fixing this. Tyler grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the door, but my legs felt heavy, my heart breaking with every step. We left that night, Tyler and I. But as we drove away, I couldn't stop the overwhelming guilt from crashing over me. What have we done? I whispered. We'll figure it out, Tyler said, his hand resting on mine. But I wasn't sure we could. The fallout begins. The days that followed felt like a blur. Tyler and I stayed in a hotel, trying to make sense of what had happened. I quit my job, knowing I couldn't face the questions and whispers. Tyler left his internship, unable to return to the office where I had worked. We tried to convince ourselves that love would fix everything, but the cracks were already forming. I couldn't stop thinking about David, about the look in his eyes when he told us to leave. I had destroyed my marriage, my family, and my career for something that felt too reckless to survive. Tyler tried to be strong, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. You regret it, don't you? He asked one night, his voice heavy. I couldn't answer, and that silence said everything. Then came the breaking point. One morning, Tyler packed a bag. I can't stay here, he said softly. Tyler, I thought we could make this work, but I can't be the reason your life fell apart. Tears blurred my vision as he kissed me one last time. I love you, he said. And then he was gone. I was alone, facing the consequences. The aftermath was even worse than I imagined. David filed for divorce immediately, and the process was brutal. Friends turned their backs, and my reputation crumbled. I found work as a freelancer, scraping by to pay rent on a small apartment. Every night, I replayed what happened, wondering if I could have stopped it, if I could have pulled back before it was too late. But the truth was, part of me didn't want to stop. Tyler and I haven't spoken since he left. I heard through mutual connections that he moved out of state, trying to start over. As for me, I'm still trying to piece my life back together. Some nights, I wonder if he still thinks about me, if he regrets walking away. But deep down, I know we were doomed from the start. What we had was dangerous, forbidden, and intoxicating. And now, it's just a memory I'll carry forever. The days after Tyler left felt endless. The apartment I had rented suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. I tried to fill the silence with work, but the weight of what I had done hung over me like a storm cloud. David refused to speak to me after the divorce papers were filed. When we met at the lawyer's office, his eyes were hollow. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. This didn't have to happen, he said before walking out, leaving me staring at the stack of papers that finalized the end of our marriage. I signed them, knowing I had no right to ask for forgiveness. Isolation and guilt. I stopped answering phone calls. Friends who once invited me to dinners and parties no longer reached out. Word had spread quickly. Affairs had a way of making people choose sides. And no one chose mine. Even work became unbearable. My assistant, who had always been supportive, now avoided eye contact. A week later, I resigned, knowing that whispers and rumors would follow me if I stayed. The guilt was suffocating. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face the night he caught us, shattered, betrayed, broken. But worst of all, I saw Tyler. I imagined him starting over in some new city, trying to rebuild his life without me. I wondered if he regretted what we did, or if he still thought about me the way I thought about him. I hated myself for missing him. The breaking point. 3 weeks after Tyler left, I received a text from him. "I miss you." It was just 3 words, but they unraveled everything I had been trying to hold together. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling as I typed a response. "I miss you too." For the next hour, we exchanged messages, brief glimpses into each other's new lives. He told me about his new job, his apartment, and how hard it had been to move on. But then he asked if we could meet. I knew it was a bad idea. I knew seeing him would only drag us back into the chaos we had barely escaped. But I said yes. The last goodbye. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town. He looked different, tired but somehow more sure of himself. When he hugged me, I felt my walls crumbling all over again. "I still love you," he said softly, his hands lingering on my waist. "I love you too," I whispered, my voice breaking. But as much as I wanted to stay in that moment, reality hit me like a slap. "This can't work, Tyler," I said, pulling away. "We've destroyed too much already." "Then let's start over," he pleaded. "We can move somewhere new, leave all of this behind." But I shook my head. "You deserve better than this, better than me." Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time, I saw just how much this had broken him too. "You were the only person who ever made me feel alive," he said. I didn't have the strength to respond. Instead, I kissed him one last time, letting the moment linger before pulling away. "Goodbye, Tyler." He didn't try to stop me. Picking up the pieces. The weeks that followed were a blur of sadness and regret. I started therapy, hoping to make sense of the choices I'd made and the wreckage I'd left behind. I took small freelance projects, enough to keep me busy, but not enough to fill the void. And every night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying memories I knew I should forget. Tyler's touch, his words, his smile. But the hardest part wasn't missing him. It was knowing I had ruined him too. I heard through mutual contacts that he quit his job and moved again, cutting ties with almost everyone who knew what happened. It was the right thing to do. But it didn't make it any easier. Facing the future. Months later, I'm still trying to rebuild my life. I keep my head down, avoiding questions and stares whenever I run into familiar faces. But some days it feels impossible to move forward. I find myself wondering what might have been if we'd been stronger, if we'd stopped before crossing the line. But I know the truth. What we had was always destined to fall apart. It was never love. It was desperation. And now, I'm left to pick up the pieces of a life I barely recognize. It's been 6 months since my life unraveled, and every day still feels like I'm piecing together fragments of who I used to be. The silence in my small apartment is deafening, but it's also where I've had to face the consequences of my actions. I've spent countless nights replaying every moment, wondering when the line blurred between harmless affection and something forbidden. It's easy to blame loneliness, dissatisfaction, and the slow erosion of my marriage, but the truth is, it wasn't just the circumstances. It was me. I let my guard down. I let myself believe that desire could fill the void I felt. And in doing so, I destroyed everything I had built. Lessons in regret. I thought Tyler was my escape, a chance to feel alive again. But instead, he became the mirror reflecting every mistake I tried to ignore. I still think about him sometimes. I wonder if he's found peace, if he's forgiven me, or himself, for what we did. But I also know I can't let myself hold on to him, not if I want to move forward. What I shared with Tyler wasn't love. It was need. We were both looking for something, validation, excitement, comfort, and we mistook that need for something deeper. Now I know better. Real love doesn't thrive in secrecy or lies. It doesn't destroy lives. It builds them. Moving forward, I've started rebuilding slowly. Freelancing has helped keep me afloat, and therapy has forced me to confront my own insecurities, the ones I buried beneath the need to feel wanted. I still avoid the places I used to go with David. Running into old friends or co-workers is a reminder of what I lost, and I'm not ready to face that yet. But I'm learning to let go of the guilt. What I did can't be undone, but I can make sure it never happens again. I can learn to be honest with myself and with others about what I want and what I need. I know now that one moment of weakness can destroy everything you thought was solid, but it can also teach you what truly matters. Final reflection. Looking back, I don't regret wanting more for myself, but I regret how I went about finding it. Passion fades, excitement dies, and what's left is the damage you can't undo. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself completely, but I've accepted that forgiveness isn't something that happens overnight. It's a process, a long, painful one, but it's the only way to move forward. And as much as it hurts, I know this chapter of my life is closed. I'll carry the scars, but I won't let them define me. A final thought. If you're ever tempted to cross that line, to chase a feeling that seems too good to resist, think about what it will cost you. Because some mistakes don't just leave you broken, they leave everyone around you broken too. What would you do if you found yourself in a situation like this? Could you walk away, or would you give in to temptation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you'd handle it. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that will leave you questioning everything. Stay tuned. Our next story is even more shocking than this one.